What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory in life. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's Technology Month episode is Joe Quaglia. Joe joined the Tech Data team in 2006 and rose to become president of the Americas. Tech Data connects the world with the power of technology and has been named one of Fortune's world's most admired companies for 11 straight years. They serve over 100 countries and come in at number 88 in the Fortune 500. But the number that really jumped out to me was their $37.2 billion in sales in 2019, with Joe as one of their great leaders. Joe and I crossed paths a decade ago when I spoke at his Direction of the Industry event in Wisconsin. But in our most recent meeting, I discovered the lessons he learned on the baseball team at Indiana State University. And I can't wait to dive into that today.
Despite automation, digitization, social media, this is still a human business. Everything we do, whether it be our marriages, our kids, our professional lives, it's all about working with people. And you know that, Don, better than anybody because you study all that. And what makes people do what they do? Well, if there's already a culture that's aligned to yours, more than half of the work is done.
Joe, thanks so much for joining us. It means the world to me that you would take time out, especially in this busy window, to take time and discuss these lessons with our listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Don.
Well, when you think back to the beginning of your sporting career, young boy, Indiana, have you ever been told a story about the first time you picked up a ball?
You know, I can't even barely remember what I did yesterday, but there's an image in my mind. I think I was probably 4 years old. I was at my grandmother's house in South Chicago, Illinois, and I went outside back because they just purchased a wiffle bat and a wiffle ball and gave it to me. And I remember I threw the ball up, swung, and I rocketed the wiffle ball over the garage into the alley next door. And I was so excited. I ran into the house and everybody was like, "What happened?" And I was just so excited to tell them what I did. And of course, you know, they thought it was really nice and cute. But for some reason, that always stuck vividly in my mind as like the first time I really kind of knew that I liked it and I had success with it at such a young age, even though it was just meaningless, right?
Well, it's funny, right? How those moments can stick. And when you get to a place, going back there is never a bad thing.
Yes, exactly.
And what drew you to sports other than being a little good at it? What was it about sports that was so attractive to you?
I think the defining moment for me was my father was a steel worker, an iron worker in the steel mills, didn't have a lot of money. And somebody connected to the Cubs who works in the steel mills and was a good friend of his, gave him 4 tickets to a Cubs game. I was 5 years old at the time, so he brought myself, my sister, and my cousin. He was so proud to take his family there. And at 5 years old, going to a Cubs game, walking through a special door to Wrigley Field and being provided bats and balls and all kinds of things was a real impressionable moment for me. If I look back, it was clearly my parents, but my father in particular, because he was one of my baseball coaches. He taught me quite a bit about the game, actually. And although I played football, basketball, but baseball was my passion and really encouraged me. I had quite a few great coaches along the way, no doubt about it. But when I think about those early years, my parents were really a great encouragement to me to follow my excitement, my passions around athletics. Ironically, my father was a White Sox fan. So he had no idea that at the time he was turning me into a Cubs fan at 5 years old.
You were the enemy at 5 already.
It was.
It is so funny how sports creates those kinds of rivalries in cities like Chicago. It's awesome. How do you end up going from Dyer, Indiana, to Indiana State?
It's interesting. I didn't have good enough grades to get into Notre Dame. Honestly, that was my first passion was Notre Dame, but I didn't have the grades. So what I ended up doing was I wanted to stay in state, and Indiana State had probably the best, one of the best Midwest baseball programs at the time in the 80s. I was actually, with my grades, able to get accepted into Indiana State, and there I went from Dyer to Terre Haute, Indiana.
Wow. Yeah, you would have been there probably just a few years after Larry Bird, right?
That's right, a couple of
Yeah.
years
So that's right when Indiana State was
on the
the
map.
world knew who they were, right?
Right, exactly.
And isn't that interesting how sports helps create that?
It does. And fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't make my decision academically. I made my decision based on what I can get into. And the camaraderie was just amazing. I've never experienced camaraderie and teamwork and discipline like I did at Indiana State compared to playing high school or little league. This was the real deal. And I really understood now that it wasn't just about the talent, it was about the entire program and the leadership of pulling that talent together.
Boy, what a powerful lesson to learn about the need. The coach's voice can wear out after a while,
Right.
but your peer, especially a closer peer, a senior, maybe a junior, can draw things from you. And I'm sure you found that to be equally true as you moved into business. What a powerful lesson.
I had never been put in a position where I saw a demonstration of such leadership at a peer level. And that taught me great things. And certainly as I move forward in life and business, the power of pulling together people and influencing them in a positive direction, even if they're at your level or close to your level, versus being an authority figure like a coach or a parent.
Sometimes life throws you a curveball, right? And unfortunately, I know from your work that you suffered an injury to your throwing arm. And as a pitcher, there's nothing more dramatic. And that forced you to give up baseball at the end of your sophomore year and not play those last 2 years. Looking back, what advice would you give someone going through an unplanned change of direction like that?
Boy, that was a tough time for me because I had aspirations to go to the next level. And obviously, every young kid, especially in Division I college baseball, thinks they have a chance to go to the major leagues. That was devastating, and I quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen based on the injury that I suffered in my arm as a pitcher. And so I quickly had to pivot. And as a young boy at 19, 20 years old, I had to make a really adult decision. And the decision I made was there had to be life after baseball, and I had to make something of myself. And I was fortunate to have chosen computer science as my career or my study in 1984. And that just happened to line up with sort of the big rush now since then with technology. But I made that decision and I decided to focus on my grades to get my GPA up because I'm going to need to get a job after college. And I made that decision. I got a 4.0 the rest of the way. And I was able to land a programming job right out of college. But what I would say in terms of advice is that no matter what your plan is, if the plan doesn't work, there's always another option. There's always another door that can be opened that can be as fulfilling, if not even more fulfilling, than your original door that you were wanting to open. And you have to make a conscious decision. Like I made that decision unknowingly. Unknowingly, I was making a decision more for survival than I was anything else, but it was a decision that I said, I'm going to make this happen. And it ended up working out just fine. But at the time, It's a very difficult thing to go through, but know that there's always another opportunity, in many cases far greater than what you were perhaps thinking at the time.
So one thing I do not know the answer to is, did you go to Indiana State knowing that the IT space might be someplace that would be a good backup
No,
football?
I actually didn't. This is an interesting, again, another sort of seminal moment of decisions in my life. At the time, I had to choose a major because remember, this wasn't about school, this was about baseball. And when I get to Indiana State, I have to choose a major. And in high school, I took a lot of architectural drafting classes. I wanted to be an architect. But in 1982, the US was going through a recession. And I had a cousin that was out of work as an architect at the time. However, I had an uncle that was in data processing. That's what they called IT back in 1982, was data processing. And he was working overtime, making a ton of money. So when I got to Indiana State, I declared computer science on that reason alone.
And again, sometimes you have no idea, and the best laid plans are the ones that you just happen into, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, staying on the athletics theme, during that time, you mentioned you'd never seen camaraderie quite like what you saw there, but you had senior leaders who were pretty impressive. Was there an interaction with an athlete or teammate that you recall or that you remember that would ultimately shape the way you thought about peer mentoring and other aspects? Maybe one of those senior leaders that stood out to you that you might recall.
Don, there's been so many great people I've been fortunate to surround myself around that have shaped me throughout my life. I'm going to maybe go in a different direction on this one and go back to the reference of my father early on as a kid. I remember very vividly again that he taught me how to pitch a baseball. We would go into the backyard and he would be the catcher. Of course, at the time, I had a pretty good arm, but he didn't have a catcher's mitt. So I would light up his hand and I remember it would swell up, but never complained. What was interesting is he would put a bucket, a steel bucket, as the batter and put a shovel in the bucket, and that would be the batter. And that's how I learned how to pitch early on in my life. He, I lost my father in December, last December, and the consoling part of this is I was able to be there at the very end and was able to thank him for all those little things, including teaching me how to pitch and being there for me and inspiring me and being a mentor to me all through my life. And it was difficult to go through that, but I take solace in the fact that I had the opportunity all the way to the end to be with him and thank him and tell him how much I love him.
Yeah, that ability to actually share and say thank you is extraordinary. Thank you for sharing that. Jumping down here, I read a magazine piece that shared with me how much you love college football. What is it about college football that you love so much?
Well, first it started with watching Notre Dame as a kid, and all my family were Notre Dame fans there in Chicago. As I look at college football versus professional football, I still think that there's a sense of purity still in college football, even though it's becoming such a large business now. When the players put on their cleats, they don't have contracts and they go out there to play and they play hard. The energy level, the pageantry, the hype, the Saturdays, the smell of campus when you're there in the fall, all of that combined is just an exciting, exciting sports venue. And I've gotten really good at following a lot of teams over the years, and I get pretty excited for Saturdays as I've watched college football evolve. And I look back at all the successful teams. Absolutely, you've got to have really good recruiting and you've got to have a lot of good talent. But that talent and that recruiting is for naught if you do not have a really good leader, a coach taking you through managing 85 kids who all want to be NFL superstars. When you think of that type of leadership and the machines and systems that they have to put in place, it's really inspiring and it's pretty amazing. So I get pretty excited about that. And, following some of the best coaches like Lou Holtz, Nick Saban, I mean, some of these coaches that, Bobby Bowden, I mean, look, how was he able to win over such a long period of time? It's pretty phenomenal. And you don't really see that in professional sports. Maybe you do now with Bill Belichick, but it's really hard to come by. And that's what I love about college football. It's the whole system, the whole package, and I get a kick out of it.
Yeah. And then I also know about your love for the Chicago Bears.
Oh, yeah.
You and I have talked about it. We have a little of that in common. I had that blessing to work with Walter Payton for the last few weeks of his
Yes.
life. So who is your favorite Bear ever and why?
Well, it's absolutely WP. It's Walter Payton. I grew up as a young boy in the 70s watching him. It was amazing to watch him because I was there in the city. I watched every game. He had a lot of talent, but he worked really, really hard to outpace everybody else. I remember watching him work out, running the stairs in the stadium, just constantly and working on his strength. And then when you see him on Sundays plowing over people, he would never quit on those final runs. I mean, he would keep going. And when you see that kind of athleticism and the work it took to put in there, I was just a big fan of Walter Payton. But more than that, he was just such a great guy. I mean, you knew him obviously way better than me. I never met him, but everything you saw and read about him on the field and off the field, he's an inspiration to many because he was just an all around great individual.
Better man than a football player. And that says a lot because he's a pretty darn good football player.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we're going to pivot now to this piece where I'd love to learn how some of what sports taught you has applied into your leadership. And you've certainly been a leader for many, many years at multiple levels of a handful of companies. One of the things that in the study of great teams I've learned is about how great teams embrace change. They don't just adjust to it, they actually seek and embrace it. And in business, sometimes it's around a merger. And I know that at Tech Data, you've grown through acquisition over the years, including picking up DLT in
Mhm.
2019. Was there a lesson you learned about transition and how to embrace transition that might have helped you in this leadership window as you're bringing two teams together and molding them into one?
Yeah, now had quite a bit of experience with acquisitions and bringing teams and companies and people together. And of course, every time you do one, you learn more and you just keep learning and learning and learning. And when I look back, whether it be in any transition with sports, a new coach coming in, for example, or teams coming together in business or acquisitions of companies coming together, there's really one common denominator, and that is culture. And culture is far bigger than the financial aspect or the strategy aspect of pulling teams and companies together. And I've done really bad jobs at maintaining and nurturing cultures. And then most recently with DLT, a phenomenal culture, by the way. What we were able to do is go in and feed the culture, not come in and say we're going to change that culture, but feed it and recognize that it's a great company that's growing far greater than the rest of the market. And that if we can just feed it, help it, allow it to grow versus dominating it and giving it space, that we would find success in that acquisition. And sure enough, since that acquisition, it's done really well. And when you acquire or bring talent in, the one thing you always have to recognize is they're winners. They didn't get to that place for nothing. In fact, you're not acquiring losers, you're acquiring winners. And when you bring winners into a team, managing and leading those dynamics and giving them the space they need to display their talent and feed that talent so they can become better is really where we've gotten to now in terms of successful acquisitions. It constantly evolves and it's constantly a moving target. But at the end of the day, you're acquiring people because it's the people that make up the culture.
The number of times that you watch these people and all the numbers make sense, but it's such oil and water, and you're going, really? Why would you do that?
Right.
you're inviting disaster. And the
Totally.
numbers will not turn out like you think they will just because some accountant told you they would.
Exactly.
Culture reigns, baby.
It does. Despite automation, digitization, social media, this is still a human business. I wish I would have been taught more psychology in school because everything we do, whether it be our marriages, our kids, our professional lives, it's all about working with people.
Yep.
And you know that, Don, better than anybody because you study all that. And what makes people do what they do? Well, if there's already a culture that's aligned to yours, more than half of the work is done.
Right. Yeah. If we could play through that just a little further, I'm wondering in your obviously broad leadership career, I'm not going to ask you to name anything, but has there ever been a window when you've actually looked at an acquisition and thought, man, those cultures won't blend? I mean, that's oil and water. And even though the numbers may say we would be bigger and more successful in the eyes of the world, the truth is we're probably inviting disaster. Have you ever
Absolutely.
turned down
Yes.
an acquisition because of culture?
I've turned down acquisitions because of culture, but I've also acquired companies that had very, very different cultures. Very tough to turn down an acquisition because of culture when you think the financials and the value proposition of serving customers can be phenomenal. But if you can't make it work because of the people, then it's going to be a very challenging financial proposition in the end. The most difficult is when the cultures, the teams are very different. The value propositions are different. Maybe the work ethic is different. Maybe the operation is different. Maybe the view on how to lead is different. And those are all areas that make it very difficult when you merge and acquire companies. That's not black and white. It's very
Right.
hard to make those assessments, which is what happens over time when you do so many. You learn more and more about what's most important besides just the black and white, the numbers of the company.
Yeah, it's been interesting working with some companies that have gone through mergers that maybe didn't work as well. And part of it was in a bad situation, you walk into a room and you immediately start identifying which company people in the room came from. And you start deciding how's this vote going to come out if we're asked to come to a vote based upon who's wearing what jersey, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you remain in the jersey you came from, how disastrous that can be.
I'll give you an example real quick, Don. The company I was referring to that we acquired that had a very different culture. I remember my first town hall with the colleagues at that company, and the questions I received from them when I opened it up for Q&A was more about how tech data was going to serve them and protect them and give them. It was very difficult. You can tell at the beginning this was a different organization. When I compare that to a most recent acquisition where the cultures are similar, in my town hall and roundtables, it was all about how can we help and what can we do to leverage the big tech data so that we can go out and sell more. You start to see a whole different group of people and their visions, attitudes, character, and behaviors, which signal either a lot of work ahead or not as much work ahead.
Yeah. We've referenced a couple of times Bob Warren, a legend at Indiana State, just a great, great coach. Had the chance to meet him and know him a little. Great leadership style. I mean, culture and leadership, very important to him, as you said. Was there a most important thing about his leadership style that you recall that every once in a while it still ticks back into your soul going through your daily
Yeah.
challenges?
What an amazing individual, leader, man, husband, father. He was a mentor to me. Leaving home and going to university, he took me in. I was really close with him. Two things stand out. Passion. He had more passion to win than anybody I'd ever met. And I never met Michael Jordan. So right now it's Bob Warren. And then the second is discipline. Again, remember I referenced this talented group of people he assembled, but they had all different behaviors and characters and egos and thoughts. He had to figure out how to bring it all together. And he did that in a systematic, disciplined way. That was what was required with that kind of talent and that kind of team. But there was nobody else that I had run into at the time in my life that had more passion. In fact, I remember in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, best of three games, it was either Indiana State, Wichita State at the time that would go into the regionals. And we lost the first game. And we were in game two and we were down by 5 in the third or fourth inning. Bob knew that he had to do something to get this team turned around. He looked for a very marginally bad call by the umpire, and he took that moment and he screamed and raced out of the dugout, went up to the umpire, made a whole big scene. He's in his face and he's ranting and raving, and clearly he wasn't going to win that argument. So what does he do? He sprints back to the dugout, jumps on the bench, and stands there with his arms crossed, staring down the umpire. You know what? We got rallied behind him on that. We came back. We beat Wichita State that second game, and then crushed them in game 3, and we went on to regionals.
You're right. He knew that the team needed something special from him, different than what he would typically do, but it showed up in the way you would behave.
But he recognized as a leader where the team was in the first game and a half of the tournament. And he had to do something to get his team back again. And he did it. Had he not done that, I'm not sure we would have been going to regionals that year.
Wow. Who coaches you today?
I have a bit of an unorthodox approach to that. I am coached by my team. My team coaches me. We adopt servant leadership approach at Tech Data. And what that means is we're here as leaders to serve our people. Part of doing that, and in all of my one-on-ones, I always get feedback. And I'm constantly getting feedback of how can I improve? What more can I do? And part of doing that to get true, honest feedback from your team, which is probably the best kind of coaching you could possibly get, is creating a system and environment of trust. When you can get enormous trust from and with the team, you get incredible feedback, both good and bad. And I thrive for the bad because it's easy to give good feedback. I'm at the point in my career, good feedback is nice, but I want to hear where my blind spots are, how I could have done something better, how could I have said something better or led differently than the way that I did before. And I use my team, I use my peer group, constantly looking for feedback.
Feedback is the breakfast of champions. You referenced camaraderie at Indiana State. How do you build camaraderie at Tech Data?
I surprise my team. They think we're going to have a full day meeting, and I'll pull at the beginning an audible. I did this recently. We had such a successful year last year that we were going to go talk about it after the year ended and have a quarterly business review. I pulled the entire team together. I kicked off the meeting talking about the great year that we had. And now it's all about what are we going to do this year? And that we were going to use this time to start to plan the course and make sure that we're focused on our game. And then I said, but I'm not going to do that. In fact, what we're going to do today is we're going to have a little bit of team building and we're going to have a lot of fun. And you guys deserve it. I've learned over the years, Don, that it's not just about hitting the numbers. It's about the team, and the team is everything, and putting the best leadership on the field and inspiring them. And that it's not just about business, that it's about us and each individual and having fun. I think creating an environment of camaraderie is so important today than perhaps it may have been years ago. I really do believe that, especially with all the things going on in the world. We work super hard. They work hard. And being able to just say, stop, let's celebrate each other.
So what did you do? What was the rest of the audible?
So we had somebody come in, an event planner that Tech Data organized a game that we conducted at downtown St. Pete. everybody got shirts. I put them on a bus. We went to the fitness store to get shoes and other things. We were broken up into teams. It was like go games. And you had to go take care of certain actions and experiences around the city. And then you had to come back by, I think it was noon, and they totaled up the scores. It was all on your iPhone. It was a competitive thing, and people were running and sweating and falling over, and nobody got hurt, but everybody had a great time. And we had a nice lunch. And then the rest of the time we spent at the hotel and just relaxed at the pool and had some, adult beverages, and everybody just chilled out and had a nice dinner, which is a lot of fun.
That was your version of standing on the bench with your arms crossed, staring at the
Yeah,
umpire, right?
exactly.
I love it. Now, last question. I know this isn't just about business, and I know how important community is to you. And I love your involvement with Boys and Girls Club. Tell me, why do you find an organization like that so important? And how do you continue to engage with those young athletes in a way that inspires you to keep doing the things you do?
Well, I'll tell you, it actually goes back to Indiana State when it all started. Bob Warren connected me to the director of the Boys Club in Terre Haute, Indiana. And I was able to get a job there while I was going to school and playing baseball. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but I became a role model really, really fast. And actually, what ended up happening is I spent quite a bit of time at the Boys and Girls Club in Terre Haute. And I realized that with my new knowledge of computer science and programming, that we could create a computer program. At the time, Apple, 1984, came out with the first Apple I, Apple II, and then Apple IIc. And they had a great philanthropic program where I was able to get 6 Apple IIcs donated by Apple to the Boys and Girls Club. And I set up a computer lab and taught the kids programming. And there was a line out the door every day to get into that computer lab to work on those computers. Fast forward 30 years, life happened. I got a job, I had a family. And then I got to a point where I felt like it was important for me to give back. And there was only one philanthropic organization that I was really passionate about, and that's the Boys and Girls Club. Today, the Boys and Girls Club serve over 4 million kids, and it's only a fraction of the need. There are over 1,000 clubs in the US. And being a national trustee, I now get to be a role model at a level that provides influence for a greater good and a real impact to children who we help every day to become responsible citizens of the future. And it's just been extremely fulfilling. And there's a lot of work to be done, and we're only scratching the surface and a lot more to come. But yeah, thanks for asking. I really do appreciate that experience and the opportunity I have there.
Joe, I'm grateful for the time you've given us, for the lessons you've taught, and the way you have let those two worlds intersect and remind us about how important it is to be a corporate competitor. Thank you again for the time today.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate the opportunity.
I love Joe's appetite for learning. Even while watching college football, he's growing as a leader. Now, I'm not telling you to sit in front of your next sporting event with a notebook, but I do believe that success leaves clues. And those clues are exactly what I've spent more than 30 years digging to find. I included a free resource on the episode 15 page on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com with the consistent characteristics of a great team based on the greatest team builders in sports and business. Culture is far bigger than business strategy and financial reports, Joe said, and he could not be more correct. My hope for you is that this podcast will help you develop a great culture. Thanks for listening to the show. Did you like what you heard? If so, subscribe to the podcast. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday, and you can be the first to listen. Subscribe on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com, or by texting subscribe to 58885, and you will receive a free chapter of one of my best-selling books. While you're there, remember to join the Greatness community. For a free weekly leadership lesson, I write for Forbes.com and information on my live and virtual keynote speeches. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Finally, are you a corporate competitor? If so, tell me the story about a time when your athletic experience taught you a leadership lesson you still use today. Until next week, I appreciate you.